So our first guest is a high-profile cultural geographer from Manchester Metropolitan University, and at the moment he's visiting the Australian Centre for Cultural and Environmental Research here at the University of Wollongong in the Faculty of Social Sciences. And I first met this particular gentleman many years ago through the geography conference scene, and it's been for quite a long while that I and other people in our group that know Tim have been hoping that he would swing by this part of the world and spend some time with us, and we've finally been able to make that possible this year, which is just a thrill for all of us. Our particular guest tonight is a prolific and highly cited scholar. Just go look him up on Google Scholar, and it's very impressive indeed, with eclectic research interests that span questions of national identity, tourism, industrial ruins, cultures of walking and driving, urban lighting, and even football, which is very timely given that the World Cup is starting tomorrow. Tomorrow?
It is tomorrow.
I think.
First game is tomorrow, 6 o'clock.
There we are. So maybe we can hashtag World Cup in this video somehow. We steal some publicity. His books include Tourists and the Taj, National Identity, Popular Culture and Everyday Life, and Urban Theory Beyond the West. So please join me in welcoming Tim Edensor. So Tim, you've been in the country now for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And it's your first time here. So any impressions?
Well, probably the first impression, or the most obvious thing to say, is apart from all the kind of unfamiliar birds, vegetation, all those things, is how easy it is for an English person to come to this part of the world and fit in just in terms of the kind of ordinary banter, the kind of everyday exchanges you have, the kind of cultural references, the general way of being. It's kind of really, I'm not used to that. I'm used to things being a little bit more edgy, or maybe having to make a few more adjustments to things. But here, it feels very, very easy and very comfortable for a Brit. And maybe that's because I don't have a posh southern accent. Maybe that helps. But it certainly seems to be that, you know, maybe the kind of down-to-earthness that I'm used to in Manchester, the north of England, kind of matches quite nicely with the Australian down-to-earthness.
No, we're just being polite to him.
Okay, right, I shall wait.
So, I mean, a question I often ask
Yeah.
academics over a few beers, when given the chance, is really how you ended up becoming an academic, really. How did you get into this gig?
Okay, so like most people, I went to university when I was 18, and that was too early for me, as I think it is for many. And I had quite a healthy grant, but wasted the money, frittered it away on, I won't say what, but I had a very nice time for a year and a half, and then of course that had scuppered me because I hadn't passed anything, and so I had to drop out of university. And that meant that this was sort of during the height of Thatcherism, when in the UK, all industries left in all right across the kind of industrial Britain were being closed down, and then it became almost impossible to get a job, even as a burger flipper or a car park attendant or anything. It was almost impossible to find work, and so I found myself on the dole, and lamenting very much the fact that I'd given up education, and now there seemed to be no way for me to find work. So the only way out was for me to take an open university degree. So I think you maybe have something similar here. So a kind of correspondence course. And then, like 2 or 3 years later, after leaving sort of formal education, I found a great interest in the social sciences. Before I hadn't been interested, it was a means to an end. And so I suppose I kind of prospered on the dole, taking the open university, getting work where I could. And after finishing the Open University degree in 3 or 4 years, I got a scholarship to go to Lancaster to do a Masters in Contemporary Sociology. And then a kind of PhD scholarship swiftly followed. So I kind of finished the PhD in 3 years. And by that time, I was kind of fully convinced that I wanted to kind of go into this line of work. In fact, that became apparent to me as soon as I started a Masters. I found it very, very enthralling. Now, after the Portuguese Revolution in 1974, communist government came into power, and they decreed that no students no youth under the age of 21 could go to university. They weren't allowed to go to university until you were 21, until you've worked a bit, until you gained a bit of experience. And I think that was quite a good rule. And certainly in my experience, when I went back to university as a kind of more mature student, I kind of really enjoyed it. Then the postscript is the socialist government took over about 8 months later and revoked it so everybody could go back to university from the age of 18.
So you benefited from having that,
so
that sort of real world experience on the dole?
Massively, and working quite a bit as well. I mean, I wasn't always on the dole. I kind of worked in foundries and as a postman and in shops, in various other ways as a DHS clerk, assessing people's claims for benefits. And I think that made me a much better academic. It kind of gave me a more kind of rounded appreciation. It helped to kind of ground theory, I guess, would be one way of putting it.
Yeah. Did you have a kind of light bulb moment, or you read a particular paper, or you had an interaction with an individual and you went, you know what, this is the gig?
I think what happened was when I started to do the masters full time, I was really hungry for knowledge. But of course, the thing is, because I've been so long out of education, reading some of this kind of theory, sociological or social theory, master's level was, I mean, a lot of it was just entirely incomprehensible to me. And then 6 months later, I couldn't understand how I couldn't understand it. That kind of moment when suddenly everything becomes much clearer. And so from that point on, I thought, this is the life for me if I can do this. And I was just very excited by the ideas. And I think, again, that's kind of part of being out of formal education for a long time, coming back into it and then really being kind of excited by ideas. And so I guess towards the end of my masters, I thought PhD, you know, I really want to do that. And then it became increasingly obvious that if I could, I wanted to be an academic.